Hey, hey, everybody. It's time to get together for your favorite show. It's a little thing we like to party. We call it a show called DisOrganized.
That was Boardwalk Empire inspired.
I see. I get you.
Hey, hey, everybody.
It just sounds like an old school Backstreet Boys.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tom Lommel. I'm your host and dungeon master. I'm not your dungeon. Am I your dungeon master today?
You're not my dungeon
You're
master.
not my player.
No.
They're not my players. It's a philosophical question. Can you dungeon master if there are no players?
You are Northern Glendale's dungeon master.
Northern Glendale. That's, well, maybe so. Yes, welcome to everyone. My lovely co-host, Mr. Dom Zook, is here with his freshly shorn pate.
Yes. That's a word for a head.
That's a description of it. That's as far as we're going to take that description. Welcome,
you,
everybody.
Margaret.
Every week, we sit down on Tuesdays and we plan our Dungeons & Dragons game, or really we talk about the issues that are coming up in our Dungeons & Dragons game that we run on Wednesdays here on Saving Throw Show. And then on Thursdays, we come back around and then we talk about how it went. How it went. Yeah, that's generally what we do. We generally talk about how it went. Hey, there's only two. Yeah.
Well, the horns.
Yeah, that's right. It's time for the horns. There's only 2 sessions left of our journey into the expedition to the Barrier Peaks. We've got a lot. We've got a lot going on with that. So we're going to dive into our topics today because we got a lot to pack into 2 sessions, right? So we are going to bing, bing, bong, 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 ping plot radar, such as it is, kind of review what elements we have in play and what elements we have yet to pay off. See if we can squeeze those things into these last 2 sessions. And along those lines, we are going to talk about finding shortcuts to build toward our climactic finale, right? My position firmly is that we need to kind of have the finale end halfway through the last session so that we have time for like denouement and wrap up and whatnot, rather than trying to have the whole final session be our climactic finale, as it were. Because I think that sense of like the players like kicking back and taking a breath and getting to address all of the world-saving whatever hooks that they have just conquered. I think that's important for you, the audience, and also for our players at the table. So there's that. Yes. Who will live? Who will die? Who are we kidding? We all want a TPK. That's right, Black Dragon 8K. Thank you so much for those kind words of encouragement.
TPK, that means you die too, right?
No, I'm not in the party. Are you kidding? Oh, this party? They're terrible. I would never join a party like this. Yes. Will I gain enough XP to reach level 4 DM, or will I be demoted down to level 2?
Time will tell. We put in the application for the level 4, but you have to complete a written test. And
Holy shit! There's a written test.
yeah.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
This is
It involves the 2nd edition trivia questions.
This is just like getting my California driver's license.
Yeah.
Son of a shit. Yes, it did just started. Beacon. Thank you so much for joining us, James V. Welcome to the show. Good to have you here. So let's take a look at our most recent incarnation of Plot Radar, shall we? So this is from 327. This is not last week, but it is the prior week. And let's see what's on the board that we can actually kind of go through and cross off. I have a red pen. Ooh, all my stuff has been in the car. It's really warm.
That ink will just flow.
Yeah, just glide like butter. It's gonna glide like butter. All right, so let's start. We don't need to address the things that are retired, right? So let's take a look at some of the stuff that we have in our immediate column that we have since obliterated, right? We haven't dealt with Tobias. We haven't dealt with Basharla's vessel, right? But we just said that could kind of live in either one of these categories, right? We did have a frog hemoth chase, so that was good. Did we have a reverse chase? We haven't. I kind of like this idea maybe coming back. I don't know. We did address the wolf in sheep's clothing element that we wanted to include. We did explore the two hells. We sort of have one hell left to go here, but this has been somewhat explored, right? We did, if we go down this thing, Xanathar's still hanging out there. Basharla's vessel, again, is still hanging out there. Thon's father's still hanging out there. Escaping the ship is still hanging out there, and I don't think they're really aware that they need to somehow escape the ship, right?
Right.
That's an issue, I think.
I do think
they don't know.
I think they think that they can
just
probably
get
just
off.
walk off. Yeah.
The reactor overload has been hinted at, but I think that is going to come into play. We did talk about what the owls are for. They have yet to use one, but I don't know. I don't think this is necessarily ready to go to be closed. Like, this can definitely be closed. This maybe can be closed. Sebastian's threat is still out there. The info stream reconnection is still out there. The God's fire is still out there. We dealt with Grayson's vision. He had that. Over here in the dangling column, they know about the time dilation. They don't feel like they can do anything about it, so they don't really care. This stuff that's dormant, the crew roster, I don't know how much more there is to explore with the crew roster, right? So last session we did have some interesting information about Kasharla potentially being murdered in the escape to the ship or what have you, right? So that's interesting, right? That was a piece of information. But I don't know that anything else on the crew roster is really going to play out in an important, significant way. We could kind of either leave that dormant, maybe even close that element. We do still have to deal with Abigail's curse too, but that's sort of tied to Tobias. I think we can almost make Tobias and Abigail one discrete element to be dealt with.
Sure.
I don't think there's anything else kind of looming out there that we haven't addressed. Can you think of any elements? Can you, folks at home, think of any elements that have been introduced that feel like they're still hanging fire? They have to be taken care of before we like wrap this thing up.
I don't think so. I think we've got everything on here that we need.
I think the only thing that's not really on here is that Megan had a vision too, right? And that isn't represented on this thing. And I think that needs to get introduced here.
Welcome, Fogquad and James V. I'm glad that you're done with meetings for the day. Black Dragon 8K, Beacon, Thomas WD Young,
Dirk Portley. Jordan.
A-Pop. Yes, welcome everyone.
The weed people. The veggie pygmies. Oh, or are you talking about the weird jellyfish brain entity thing that they promised they would save, right?
Oh, right.
Yeah, let's go through and so let's take this as that's what we knew, but it's a little bit old, right? So let's do an updated one.
The seaweed people.
The seaweed.
Your favorite Uncle Dave. Hello.
Seaweed jellyfish people thing, right? Whatever the heck they are. I know what they are, but whether the players will get to that or not. Modern Chow, you are also a Jordan. Well, interesting information to drop into chat.
Your first name's not Modern?
No, Jordan is a very modern name, actually. There's not one single Jordan in the Bible. I looked.
Anyway.
Population tire. All right. Except what, Jordan? Except the River Jordan. Yeah.
And, Jordan and his amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. With Pharaoh Jordan.
Joseph. That was Joseph and his amazing Technicolor.
Jordan, father of Jesus.
Right. Well, not technically the father.
All right, right.
Sort of like a stepfather.
Jordan, who betrayed Jesus.
Oh, yeah. 30 Pieces of Silver Jordan.
Yeah. Jordan.
Oh, there's the Jordan Mary.
Right? The Jordan
Mother
Mary,
of Jesus.
Right? And the Holy Jordan.
That's right, the Holy Jordan. The Garden of Jordan. Or was it the Jordan of Eden?
Oh, it was the Jordan.
The Jordan of Eden. All right. I'm not going to go through. Should we list what's closed and retired? I suppose we could a little bit, right? I think, well, the second level of hell isn't really closed and retired, is it?
No, I don't think so.
No. Well, the seaweed people.
That's a dangling participle right now.
That's not. Is that
not how you
dangling?
say it. Well,
I think that's going to have to come up in the next session.
Yeah, if they.
Let's make a list. Let's just make a big list of what
Sure.
needs to come up in the next session.
Yeah.
Right. All right. The seaweed. I'm going to call it the seaweed promise. AKA. This was awful. The boiled children. What?
Gross.
Yeah.
I have to mute my ears.
Everybody's like, I still feel like, you know, it's the second level of hell. There's a reason that people feel like the rest of the ship is like, don't go there. Yeah, because it's awful, and there's the boiled children down there will infiltrate your mind. Ugh. No, thank you. All right, so there's that. I'm going to put Tobias and Abigail.
Yeah.
As something that needs to be addressed in the next session. I think Basharla's vessel. Needs to be addressed either in one of these, either in the approaching or in the immediate session, right? I don't know. That's kind of open to interpretation. I could see it being part of the next session, right? Well, that's because you that's because you overboiled them.
Are we Jonathan Swifting it right now? The way to cure the overpopulation problem is just to start eating children.
Yeah, sure. So we've got Ava's vision. We have escaping the ship. Or at least the fact that they are trapped on the ship needs to come into play.
Yeah.
And I think that also maybe ties into reactor overload, right? Likewise, I think Sebastian and the InfoStream connection are one thing, right?
Yes, they are still on the ship. The entirety of Expedition to the Barrier Peaks is on a ship.
Yes.
Good point, Christian.
All right. So I think approaching. Is there anything else here? They need to deal with the time dilation. I think the time dilation. So things that live in the approaching column, there really shouldn't be anything in this column because we have 2 sessions left, right? So let's just no. Things that are approaching Xanathar, whatever that presentation is like, and then dealing with the time dilation, which almost are kind of connected, right? And then actually escaping
The reactor overload?
the ship. I think,
Oh, yeah.
here it's
I see.
what hasn't been introduced is the idea that they're trapped on the ship.
Sure.
Here they actually have to get out, and then in the next session they also have to deal with Thawne's father. Theoretically, he could move up here, right? He's sort of tied into this Tobias and Abigail issue here as well. Things that I would say are dormant, again, are the doppelgangers. I think there's somebody that we could... Oh, there's one other thing that we need to put on the map here, right? We ended on a cliffhanger. Mm-hmm. Who are these purple gnomes? Yes!
Black Dragon, 8K, thank you so much.
Nice!
And Christian, we'll see how long it takes. There it is. 17 months.
Whoa! Very good. Thank you so much, Christian, Linky, and Black Dragon AK for subbing back up.
Thanks, guys. Let us know who you
Hi.
want to send your rerolls to.
Just to be clear, Thomas W. DeYoung, I don't think they were acutely aware that they got on the ship by going through a one-way portal, right?
Yeah.
I think they think that they can go back up through the elevator, go through that airlock, and then they'll be in that cave, and then it's just like, well, we're back on the prime material. How do we,
Hey, Blind Seer, thank you so much for the
Nice,
500
thank you.
bits. Yeah, I would almost bet that they feel like, okay, we'll just go back to where we came in and then walk out the door. And to be fair, there's nothing necessarily that they've run into except for a couple people telling them, hey, we're in different places right now.
Right,
But I don't know if
right.
it's really. I think they still feel like, well, that part's not. That part's still attached.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they've really glommed onto the fact.
Yeah, I think there's a bunch of stuff that we could put into the closed thing here, but I don't think it's necessary, right? Yeah, they know they shifted. They don't really know that. I don't think they know that they're trapped, and I think it's something that they don't want to think about.
Right.
Right? I think they don't want to have to. They don't want to consider the idea that they're trapped because they don't feel like they have any tools to solve it anyhow. Mm-hmm. Right? So, why consider a problem that you can't solve, and why bring it up to the DM and just give the DM ideas of like, oh yeah, maybe you are trapped on the ship when you don't know whether the DM has even had that idea or not.
Right.
It's a little metagamey, but
Right.
There's something to be said for why bring up a hypothetical that's only going to complicate, going to complicate your life on a downside and provide no upside if it's not true.
Right.
Like, it only has a null or bad result. So this is where we're at, right? We're really looking at a lot of things in this next session, and then next week looks pretty, I think it looks manageable, but that's assuming that we get to here, right?
There's a lot we have to get through tomorrow to be able to get
there's
there.
a lot of
Yeah.
information here. So let's break out another one of my famous tools here. Wow. Harold is sawing logs.
Yeah, he is.
We took the dogs to lunch out in the blistering, it is literally blistering heat out there. It's bad here in Los
Mm-hmm.
Angeles this week. And so they're pretty worn out.
Yeah, I think we hit 96 yesterday.
We set a record yesterday for high temp for this time of year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, Harold is like this into his.
Just face down. All right, so let's kind of keep things a little bit organized here.
Okay.
So I can see this part. You can't because I'm cool. There's not a good way to. I mean, I suppose. Let me move this over. Oh, I went off the edge.
I can.
Oh, it's pretty tight, huh? That's
can
fine.
make that bigger.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. All right. So let's look at what we're. So that's plot radar. Let's put some of this stuff on the board, and this is really kind of like part of finding shortcuts to build toward our finale. I only need the one page.
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. And in fact, I only need that part of the page, right? Look at that. I got some room. It's fine. However you want to do it. So, so this plot device is really designed to be a single encounter, right? It's designed to pack as much as we can into a single encounter, right? But here's the beauty of the way that plot device or plot radar works. You can just divide it like that.
Whoa.
Right? So let's think about the idea that we're probably going to have 2, maybe 3 encounters, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know. Once I get these open threads pulled in, it'll all just... In fact, let me do it this way. Here. You stay there. You're fine. Everything's fine. So the first thing that we're going to do is they're going to encounter these weird engineer guys, right? So we can put the purple gnomes in this first encounter. Whatever these guys are, right? I think we can safely assume, I should have divided this in 3, right? Like figure, well, maybe we'll have 3 encounters.
I don't know. Two might be.
Let's assume they're going to have one big one with these gnomes somehow, and they're going to have. I think what we're going to shoot for is 3 encounters or 3 sections to the adventure tomorrow night, right? Now, I think in this one, so somewhere in here we need to. The 3 parts that I kind of envision happening tomorrow night, right? Some sort of information dump role-playing encounter with the gnomes. That could be shorter, it could be long. Mm-hmm. But I think we can bake in some climactic or dramatic events into that encounter that will make it pack a lot more punch, right? Move the story along or raise the stakes. Somewhere in there, they need to go and flip the breaker to turn the power on, right? Mm-hmm. And or deal with the reactor. So that was... I am sort of assuming that the players are going to make progress in a linear fashion, but, we'll see. I mean, that's the question, right? Are the purple gnomes linked to Warwent? We had that on the sheet before. Mm-hmm. That's kind of an open thing, right? So they need to turn the power back on to the bioengineering chamber, and then they need to go back to the bioengineering chamber. There's almost like a mini beat in here somewhere. Do I dare divide it into 4?
Oh boy.
I don't think that journey back is going to be a big deal, right? So let's put it in...
Black Dragon says, 4 parts, you monster.
Yeah. Location. Adversaries. I think it'd be interesting if the Frog Moth made a reappearance here. Allies. discoverables, we can figure that out later. So yeah, that's that. This, I think, is bioengineering, right? So location, bioengineering. Question from Blind Seer is, do I want it to be flipping a switch or like inserting rods like in a reactor, something more manual than a switch? An opportunity to sacrifice Eric. Always looking for an
There's
opportunity
so
for
many of them.
Eric to fulfill his lifelong dream of killing his character off. I told them that there was like a lever that they had to switch from the down position to the up position or something like that they had to just flip from one to the other. You know, some of this is complicated by Avril still having 2 minutes basically left. A minute or 2 minutes left on her cube of force effect that she can do with wave, right? And so, because we negotiated the whole thing of like, well, you could keep the God's Fire out for a minute by activating this thing, I think they'll probably use it in that area, right? So let's just assume that this thing here, this location 2, I guess we're gonna call it, is going to be the transformer, the primary distribution transformer, or whatever it is. Let's just call it the transformer. I think it's possible that it's possible that we might split this into the reactor as well. I don't know. I'm gonna put a question mark after that. This for sure we know. This basically is going to be hell too, probably. I think there's an opportunity here for, I think a discoverable here, and I think this would probably end up being a chat unlock, might be some sort of shortcut, right? When we talk about ways that we can, we don't have all of our elements on the board, but when we talk about ways that we can collapse some of the action here, creating shortcuts between locations that you've already traveled through is an excellent technique, right? It's very important to go, yes, you went through this arduous journey, but there's a shortcut. You see it in like Lord of the Rings, right? Oh, well, we could go all the way through this horrible swamp, through all these orcs and whatnot. And in fact, they basically send the other halflings through that kind of quest, right? They send the other halflings like into orc territory where they have to pretend that they're goblins and crap like that. But instead, Frodo and Sam go up the staircase and kind of sneak through the Shelob's lair. So it's an easy technique that you can go, oh, well, now that you're there, they know of a quick way back. It saves you a bunch of retreading the same territory. Literally retreading the same territory. This location is, I don't know, engineering, whatever you want to call it, the engineering HQ.
Hi, Risky. Welcome in.
Like, what does this place look like? Where within engineering are they? Actually, I'm going to put an arrow here. Engineering HQ. Do they live like in the antenna array? Maybe they know what's going on with that thing. Did I bring my map of the level? I think I do.
Mentioned shortcuts in Lord of the Rings, and I realized at the end of Lord of the Rings, they had kind of eliminated all the issues with every shortcut on Middle Earth.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they took care of the Balrog that was in Moria, so now you can go through Moria without issue. Yeah, sure, there's a ton of, goblins and orcs there, but they pretty much took care of them too.
Yeah.
They, let's see, what other shortcuts?
So the classic shortcut in Lord of the Rings is at the end, the eagles show up.
Well, yeah, that is.
But that's an exact illustration of what I'm talking about, right? Is like, rather than having to like cover all of the ground and say, okay, well, here's how, the place has changed since the fall of Sauron, blah, 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 right? Just, we put them on eagles and away they go. Just fast forward through the fiction.
But why?
I do have a map.
Here you go.
All right. Our dog is very comfortable. All right. So if we look at this, they could be in any of these places, right? They could be in the engineering command deck. They couldn't be in the power core array or in the... But they could live by the spent fuel pool. They could be by these gravitic field regulators. Like the purple gnomes, whoever these guys are, could live in one of these other areas, right? The gravity regulators, whatever, right? Those are places. And by the way, if you're a Patreon backer, you have access to these schematics that we made up. I don't know if you noticed that, but I spent a lot of time on Thursday putting them together. I hope you get a chance to take a look at them and get some use out of them. So this is our location, somewhere within the engineering deck, or Hell 1, whatever you want to call it. No, all right, buddy. Luigi's decided to go for a stretch.
Oh yeah.
So that's going on, right? I think the purple gnomes clearly are the allies here. Let's go through and seal off the last of our. We've got our locations. Let's figure out who goes in where, right? So we know that Tobias and Abigail are going to be in. They're going to be dealt with on the bioengineering deck here. So we're going to put them over here. We could also potentially, Ava's been given the task of creating a body for Basharla Masharla, right? Basharla's vessel could be addressed in bioengineering. Somebody had a question? Risky?
No, it's about Lord of the Rings. Yes, in the book, Grima and Sauron both turn up again and destroy the Shire, but not in the movies. But there is a deleted scenes where Grima does show back up again.
True. All right. So I think open threads. Let's get Sebastian and the info stream connection in here, right? Let's pack it up front. I mean, either there, or we potentially put it in somehow incorporated into this Transformers scene, right? Like this could also live in here, right? It would be nice to pack some things into this scene because this scene doesn't have a lot of this, right?
Sure.
But trapped on the ship definitely can come up. What else can come up here? I think reactor overload, again, is like one of these things where it's like either in here or it's in the transformer reactor thing.
Well, it makes sense, to put it in this guy, right?
So...
I think turning on the reactor and setting it to overload would also turn on the info stream or give power to, back to that area, and so that sort of connects those dots.
Right. So now that we kind of divide this out, I don't see anything else on our plot radar. One thing that we could kind of move forward here and maybe make a discoverable is actually escaping. The ship. Likewise, I think it's possible that these gnome guys know something about the time dilation AKA the dimensional instability, right? All right. So, I think we've got everything in. You know, we made a rather big list here, right? This is a lot of issues, and when we looked at it, I was like, how do we fit all of this stuff in here? But when you look at the plot device and you divide this into scenes, now you start to see, okay, well, I can start slipping information into these scenes. That really divides it out in a fairly straightforward manner, right? I think this is a nice distribution of kind of a listing of our threats, our open threads, and also like our ways to solve some of our problems, right? Like this probably should be bigger, this piece of it, the scene that's gonna happen in the bioengineering chamber, because they have a lot to do, right? They've got to get the doppelgangers. Now let's put them back on the board as allies. Let's put Sebastian on the board as an adversary whose presence is felt, right? Not necessarily that he's there directly fighting them, but his presence as an adversary is felt. His influence is going to be felt in that scene, right? We're trying to raise the stakes as we go through this whole thing. So when we look for shortcuts to build towards our finale, right? One of the things is, can we start to kind of combine events, right? Can the info stream, is it something where Sebastian reconnects the info stream and then decides to suicide the ship, right? Okay, he sets the reactor on overload. I'm not saying that's the way that it has to work, but that would be a way to start combining things in a logical and plausible fashion that gets the action going and gets the beats in that we want and addresses the threads that we have that are open, but does it in a very concise manner, right? So the beauty of plot radar is you can start to take these things and collapse them together into cohesive dramatic beats that are combined, rather than, oh, okay, now I have to take care of this, and we take care of this, and we take care of this, and we take care of this, rather than ping-ponging all over the place, right? And it's actually it comes across as a fairly deft dramatic technique where you take something from here and you take something from here and you pull them together into one thing, right? Where the solution to Tobias and Abigail and creating a vessel for Basharla, and maybe even more than that, is the bioengineering chamber works better than we thought. That's the other part of it, right? Is what is our discoverable here, or an asset maybe, that's going to come about as a result of this scene. And a big one is for lack of a better term, sort of re-sleeving people, right? So this sort of transhuman kind of fiction of, let's just put, implant into new bodies. And you can, whether that's implanting an NPC or implanting one of the party members.
Sure.
Right? Like, I think potentially, I don't know. It's hard for me to talk about this too much without giving big pieces of our finale away for you guys, and I don't want to necessarily do that. But I'm going to talk about things that are possibilities, not certainties, right? So there's a possibility for a scene here where they decide, okay, I'm going to get the pattern for a troll, and I'm going to download myself into a troll or a frost giant or whatever, right? Like if they could put their personalities into these things and it would enable them to escape the ship or to fight better or whatever, that could be really compelling. That could be like a really fun kind of like big scene moment. Now, maybe they can do that somehow remotely, right? Mm-hmm. That would be interesting, right? Yeah. Yeah, how the doppelgangers get recycled. But this is going to be, we should allow a lot of meaty time for this to happen. That means we sort of have to streamline what this front thing is, right? This thing with the gnomes and Warwind. Now, the other shortcut that I think you can deploy here, or which I'm certainly considering deploying, is introducing characters who have dramatically more knowledge of the situation than the players do, right? Mm-hmm. So if these gnome guys, we might as well just assume that they're the engineers on the ship, right? They must know something about running the inner workings of the ship, how the reactor works, etc. Maybe they're not great at it, but let's just assume that they know what's going on with the engines of the ship. Okay, well, that's a whole bunch of information that they can convey. On top of that, they might have information about actually, how people have gotten off the ship. If they're related to Warwind, and everybody assumes that they are, and I think the party probably does, then they're going to ask, or it's not a guarantee that the party is going to ask, do they know Warwind or what Warwind did, right? Mm-hmm. But it is something that we can, as the DM can guarantee, is that they know what happened to Warwind. And so when the party is like, oh, we're from outside the ship, they can volunteer information like, oh, have you seen our friend? Mm-hmm. Like that can provide a prompt. That's not railroady, right? Yeah, as AY Pop points out, you can introduce these guys as NPCs to fill in the blanks or provide answers to questions that the party hasn't even answered, right?
Or known to ask.
I don't think it's a huge presumption that the gnomes and Warwind are related. I think chat glommed onto it pretty quickly, and I think the party has that suspicion as well. Yeah. I haven't heard them openly state it, but also, if I have decided, if I bake into the history of these guys that Warwind came from these guys, right? Maybe Warwind has left traces of himself behind or tales of himself behind, or as James V points out, like maybe they worship Warwind as like the first engineer or something like that. Mm-hmm. Like maybe he has some sort of deific categorization, right? Or place within their circle of religion. It would be interesting and a callback to the themes that we introduced earlier with the Vegapygmies if the gnomish guys worshipped old crew members or whatever, or have this whole weird cosmological kind of thing, right? I'm not sure where that goes in our thing here, but I think there's a atmosphere of religious ritual that could be at play here, right? And that's a callback to the Vegapygmies. I personally really enjoy the fact that they all talk, the inhabitants of the ship talk about it like it's earth, heaven, and hell, and that they are very specific places, but they have a religious meaning in their mind, right? I think that's a fascinating theme that we've introduced into this adventure that I think is worth reinforcing. So, I like the idea that they are almost like engineer priests. And I think that puts them in the category of allies. I think, too, Harold is just sawing it up over here.
He is
Yeah.
out. Yes, that is a pug you hear snoring.
It is amazing that you can hear him snoring because he is literally halfway across the room.
Yeah.
And our mics are not that sensitive. Whether he appears himself or not, I think Warwent's deeds. Ooh. I think Warwent's deeds are an ally. They are either a discoverable or actually I don't think they should be a discoverable because that's sort of this is sort of optional stuff. Mm-hmm. I think Warwent's deeds actually functions as an ally or a resource here. Right? And I think whatever his history is, I think that's one of the payoffs in it, or at least it's an avenue to be a payoff in this particular scene. If you want to get to more information about what's going on with the ship that raises the stakes, or information about the fact that they're trapped here on the ship, Warwent's deeds can help give us that insight, right? So that's one technique that you can use to start combining stuff where I've got all of these things floating in the air, right? Well, the whole purpose of this scene is to show that they're trapped on the ship. That's really like the main thing. And potentially help them understand how to escape, or that there's something weird going on with the dimensional instability and the time dilation. Like, I feel like these guys know that the ship is not going anywhere. And they're like, we can't shut it off. Then I think Warwent's deeds is the bridge that you use to get that information to the players when they may not necessarily be making the jump that you understand, or that you see from your side of the DM screen, right? I think it may be a situation where it's not that they are keeping the engines running because they want to keep the engines running. I think it's one of those situations where the engines are running and they can either keep them running or the whole thing starts to fall apart, right? Cooldown 9 seconds, D20 robot. Oh, man. Man, time to get on Twitch and get some gold. So I don't think it's necessarily that, I don't think these purple gnome, these engineer priests, whatever you want to call them, I don't think they're responsible for the ship running at maximum capacity. I think the ship has been sort of locked into like a command that it can't erase.
Yeah.
And the engines are pegged at maximum capacity and they're just keeping shit from just blowing up.
Sure.
Right? So that's one technique that you can use. They could also be somehow like, they could also maybe know about this shortcut. Right? I probably shouldn't draw through that. If we look at the reactor overload scene, I don't know how much there is to discover in this thing because it really is just sort of an A/B kind of task.
Yeah.
Right? And the only thing that may be worse is potentially like maybe Sebastian is somehow involved here. And maybe energy itself is worse, or is there something living in there? Right? I mean, that would be fascinating too, what if there's something living in the reactor? Or in this, they're not going in the reactor, in this transformer area, or whatever.
Maybe like the Froggy Moth's mom.
That's Mom He Moth.
Mom, he moth. Did you meet my son? He needs more friends.
AY Pop says, is it bad form to introduce items that advance the plot, like a MacGuffin? I'm curious exactly what you would introduce to advance the plot, right?
Yes, one more till the finale. We have 2 more episodes left.
Mom He Moth.
There you go. Yeah.
I don't think it's necessarily bad form to introduce a MacGuffin. That helps solve the plot. A time elemental. That would be interesting. I like that idea. Well, and so that gives me an idea that maybe plays into the atmosphere here, because we've talked about playing with this stuff before. What if gravity and or time and space are distorted in one of these 2 areas? Right? So what if time passes much quicker in this area that's filled with all this weird, pollution or whatever? Now, it's a dick move, but that also dramatically changes their ability to use the cube of force to get out of this thing.
Sure.
Right? If you're like, time goes by 10 times faster in this area of the ship. Okay, well now we don't have 10 rounds to get through this thing. We have 1 round to get all the way down there. Which, maybe you make that doable. Or maybe you make it so that they know that they can only get down and they're going to have to try and get out. Or they're going to have to try and get down there and then activate the cube so that they can then get out. Right? But I love this idea that either gravity or time or space or all 3 of them are in flux in this particular reactor area.
Right.
Right? It screws with the player's planning. It makes it a much more interesting and bizarre kind of encounter. It's a great way of introducing something fantastic into this particular encounter that makes it more than click, activate the cube, walk down the hallway, flip the switch, it's over.
Right.
Now there's a number of other things that we could do instead, but you don't often screw around with time or gravity or space in terms of a D&D, a standard D&D encounter.
Right.
You don't often go, well, the closest you get to it in D&D is you say, this is difficult terrain, it's going to take you 2 or 3, it's going to take you twice your movement to get through this area, right? That's the closest you get to screwing around with space that's warped somehow.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's a really, really interesting, regardless of whether now the great thing about this is it's not a creature, right? It doesn't have hit points. It is an atmospheric It is an atmospheric effect that then you can change according to the whoa, we're still here.
Yeah, we're still here.
That you can change according to your needs as the situation dictates, right? So it's not a matter of like killing, doing enough damage to this thing that it dies. It's more it's more responding to how the time or the space, the gravity ebbs and flows. I think it would be really interesting to maybe kind of put together like a weird little, like two or three sliders, right? that you could then roll each round and they could see like how the gravity moves up and the time slows down or speeds up or whatever, right? Like that would be an interesting track to have on the board, or you'd have literally like a gravity track, a time track, and a space track, and you'd move those little counters up and down. How do you defeat time? I mean, I like that idea of like, how do you defeat time?
What's the opposite of time?
What is the, yeah. I mean,
Anti-time.
anti-time. Is going back in time the opposite of time?
No, that's still time though, right?
Griffin of H points out, do we have enough time to let them explore such a thing? I think one of the things that brings us to is, let's look at how we want to weight these various scenes. If I'm really jazzed about this idea, and it seems like it's going to take 45 minutes to kind of fight our way, quote unquote, fight our way through this thing, I want to give this scene more time, or more weight. I don't necessarily want to give this scene a lot of weight because there's not a ton of deliverables here, discoverables here, right? And I will say, in some respects, knowing that I only had 2 episodes left, it wasn't necessarily the wisest move on my part to end on a cliffhanger where those gnome guys show up, because the party has a notoriously difficult time communicating with them. And they have to learn something from them to make it worth it. But I think the other part that they're going to learn from them, the other resource here that they get from it is info on the reactor. Like, that's a payoff. So this scene leads to this scene because they talk to these guys and they say, oh yeah, if you go in there, they can warn them about these 3 issues. We don't ever go in there because X, Y, and Z. That's why nobody's ever touched that. There's dimensional instability, and that means we can kind of we can also combine the transformer and the reactor. Is that this one? It is this one. What if, because the time and space are unstable around the power core array, what if this wall ends up kind of like disappearing, like shifting out of existence and stuff like that, and they start getting exposed to the primary reactor core? Well, now all of a sudden I've got one room that's actually two rooms, but goes together into this thing. Yeah, and maybe that's what happened to Warwent. It was he went in there and he was screwing around with how to open or manipulate or stabilize this place, and he got sucked through and he disappeared. It's fantastic, right? Now we're communicating a lot of information that leads us into the next scene, that prepares the party with what they're about to deal with, explains backstory, and makes a connection to groundwork that you've laid literally months before, right? Like, when was the first time Warwent came up? Way back, in season 1 when Amy was playing.
Right.
So it's here's the thing. I did not plan how Warwent got off the ship or that he was on the ship or whatever. I just knew that he was an interesting character that I introduced. He's this gnome tinker guy who's apparently a genius. And then as we got closer to Barrier Peaks, I was like, oh, this is really maybe I could somehow incorporate him. And now here we are at the end of Barrier Peaks going, well, this is how it pays off. And I haven't even actually introduced that guy, right? Like, they're not actually going to meet him.
Right.
At the end of the adventure. But they're going to go, I know where he came from. I got to find that guy, right? And as BSB Care points out, to the players, it looks like I planned it the entire time. A Schrodinger's clue that I just sort of kept massaging and kind of just dropping a little bit more information, a little more information. Now it comes into specific focus. We do a revelation of, okay, we define what that thing means. And the players go, oh yeah, I was wondering what his deal was. Rather than having to have a written backstory that I'm trying to constantly revise and adjudicate and
Right.
plug back in, Is he their god? Is he one of their compatriots? Whatever. It's still a satisfying answer to the party. Whatever. Yes, Black Dragon AK. I'm glad that my secrets are safe with you. Yes, I definitely planned this all along. Yeah.
Dirk Portly, you can't come in here and tell anyone.
Don't, Dirk Portly. Don't eat the apple in the Jordan of Eden. So if we're going to look at, like, you know, Griffin of H makes a great point here of we don't have a ton of time. So the nice thing about this is it's not only an information management tool, right? It's also a pacing tool. Let's keep this part of it pretty short. Let's give them the space to kind of work on the reactor problem and pose an interesting, you know, conundrum to them of like, how are they going to deal with gravity and maybe, you know, maybe this is even different for each individual character or the space that they're in or whatever, right? Wah, 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 wah. The great thing about this is we can also work in, if we have this gravity time space, then we can also work in Ava's vision, right? That can become part of this scene. The other piece of it is this shortcut, this journey back thing. Okay, the reactor overload screws with gravity, time, and space. Maybe they find a shortcut back up to the bioengineering chamber that, like, you know, these weird portals are opening all the time, and they open onto different parts of the ship as well as different dimensions and whatnot, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, if they're able to get this working again, right, and get the info stream turned back on, maybe there were always entrances to other areas of the ship, you know, that they were just turned off or whatever.
Or maybe it's one-way things where, like, the gnomes are like, if we go through there, we'll never come back because we're not waterproof.
Yeah.
You know, or whatever. Yeah, maybe they just do like a decoder on Thawne's eye, and they can speak fluently with one another. I think it also may be something where it doesn't have to be, you know, 0 to 100, right? Maybe Thawne now knows, you know, enough of their weird Germanic language is downloaded into his brain that he can kind of speak to them in pidgin English or whatever, right? Like maybe instead of it being they don't understand anything to they can fluently converse, maybe it's like 70%, you know, or whatever. So if we look at how we want to weight these things, this is fairly light. Let's kind of get out of this quickly. The reactor scene is somewhat complicated. We could try and make it, I mean, it can be as complicated as we need it to be if it's an atmospheric effect, right? If it ends up, this is the advantage of creating an environmental trap versus creating a combat encounter. Is if you create a combat encounter, they have to plausibly defeat the combat encounter. If they find themselves in an environmental trap, then that environmental trap can be dispelled or dissipated as the DM sees fit in line with the pacing, right? But we give some time to that. This journey back, I think, is short. Right? Stay out of that. And then give them time to screw around with bioengineering, with rebuilding the bodies, you know, not really regenerating, but downloading and then reintegrating these things into whatever. Mm-hmm. I don't know. We always come back to is this railroady, right? I don't know. Is it?
I mean, the thing here, the beauty of this is that they can kind of go through any of these at any point, at any time, and they can kind of make of all of this what they will. I mean, they could end up talking to these guys and get talked out of going into the reactor, right? They could be, oh, it just fucks with you, so no, we're not going to do that. Okay, then we're going to have to figure out another way to turn on the, or something like that. Like, there are ways that they can get out of this. Now, it's still not, even if you had them go into the reactor and we're basically like, well, no, that's the only way you can do things is to go through this reactor, and you're going to have to deal with it, I don't think that's necessarily railroady at all, because again, like you said, it's railroady if bad things happen, right? If they're not able to avoid the bad things necessarily.
Yeah, if they're forced to do something stupid. Yeah, God's fire is in the reactor. Here, put that down. They could potentially come away with a piece of God's fire.
Leave it as you found it. I learned that from the National Park System.
I mean, I think it would be really interesting if they could take a part of the reactor out and carry it around with them, which theoretically, like, they could do with Ava, right? Like, she can absorb enough damage and or keep healing herself that she could probably carry a piece of radioactive material around with her. That creates some really interesting implications for the next session, right? Or any session.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, the goal was to get the Godfire. I think, I just pose it as a hypothetical here of, is this all too pre-planned? Is it too neat? That sort of stuff. Is that railroading? Again, I think railroading is when you force actions upon the party that make them look stupid, where they would go, in hindsight, they would go, no, I would not do that. I think it's also sort of like required to start to narrow choices when you're building towards a climax, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can't think of many sandbox adventures that it's like, well, the climax could be anything. Our poor dog. I don't know. I have mixed feelings about it. Have we built an interesting roller coaster? Yeah, I think so. And we are on a time constraint, right? So it is sort of Dragon's Lair style options of A, B, or C, right? They're not forced to follow this narrative. There is somewhat like their choices are limited, right? But I also think when you give them too many choices, they don't know what to do.
As Del Castillo says, you have to reduce the possibility of choice paralysis at this stage of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think especially with only two sessions left, you have to reduce that possibility. Also, I think it helps to anticipate what the logical course of action is for the players, right? And as we've seen before, you can't ever do that 100%. Sometimes they're just going to push Grayson into the Froggermoth tank, right? But this scene helps shape their logical course of action in a way that I can respond to in real time because I'm having them interact with an actual NPC. I can endow the gnomes with information that will help them create a plan of action or anticipate complications and obstacles that might be in their path that they didn't know about. And that helps make the party feel smart and feel competent. I'm really glad we talked to those guys so that we knew that this isn't going to work or whatever, right? There was a question. What do I think about creating like a Universe 2, Earth 2 type of scenario with the characters?
Yeah.
I think at this stage in the game, it would be tricky to introduce that. I don't know. I think it would be weird if they met their, not necessarily evil twins, but they met like a Splinter Universe version of themselves.
What if this now? I'm blanking on the name of the series, but Brandon Sanderson's Mistborn, the Mistborn series. I don't know if you've read it, but basically there's people called allomancers, and they basically ingest metals, and it gives them abilities to do different things. They can use like magnetism and stuff like that to do various things, but there's this special metal that allows them to see briefly like 20 seconds into the future so that they can avoid things and they just become master fighters, but it's very limited. It burns all of their resources and everything. So what if they get into the reactor, and then as space and time and stuff start changing, they're seeing echoes, future echoes of themselves. And it's like they can see themselves failing doing one thing, like pulling a trigger or something like that, and then everything explodes or whatever, or they're able to see things kind of like behind them and in front of them as they're moving, so they kind of get an idea of like.
It's almost like the Omnicron 13 from Galaxy Quest, right? Where you could activate it and rewind the past 13 seconds. I think that's an interesting way to approach this puzzle of, you've got so many fuel rods from the reactor that you can burn out.
Sure.
And essentially rewind time and get to it. I think the trick on that is replaying those scenes in different ways that's dynamic and interesting, or that they can discover might take more time than we have in the session. Right?
Sure.
Because I think that kind of puzzle is one of those things where you play through it the first time, you spectacularly fail, and then it resets. Right? And you see yourself like pull that rod out of the reactor and it's burned up, and then you realize you're back at the start again. The clock resets, right? And then the second time you go, okay, well, I'm going to try and do something different, and maybe you discover one thing. But it typically ends up being you have to discover like 3 to 5 things that you have to do exactly right, which means you have to play the scene 5 times over. And that's a lot of, like if we were to go through 5 rounds, which is essentially what it would be, it'd be more like 7 or 8 rounds, because at the end of round 1, you have to explain to everyone like, oh, there was just a time loop.
Right, yeah.
So that might be more complicated than what we have time for. I like that idea. I like the idea that maybe instead of it being some sort of puzzle that they have to solve, maybe it ends up being, again, that could be a chat unlockable of, they get a retry at it. Like there's a time loop and they get a retry at it. And as we kind of go up the ladder of chat unlocks, they could get 2 retries, or they start off with 2, they get 3, then they get 4 or whatever. That could be interesting. But I like the idea that they can take something from the reactor and then use it, channel it to create to maybe move one of these sliders, like to change the gravity or to change the time or the space or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Which idea is best explored in the first sessions of a campaign versus the end? I missed this.
I think what we were just talking about, the using future.
Oh, the alternate universes guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know.
I think it's good.
There's a lot of possibilities here, right? Is the point?
Yeah, I think it would be fine, but we have so much to get through, and honestly, like this section could take quite a long time, knowing the party and how they like to talk to people.
Well, what's weird though is they don't like to talk to people, right?
Sometimes it depends. It really depends on how you deliver it. Because if you make it seem like this is someone they need to talk to, they're gonna rack their brains trying to figure out what they need to talk to this person about. You know what I mean?
Maybe. I mean, they had the ability to talk to Brainiac last session as much as they wanted to. And
Right,
they were like, is there any power to this stuff? No? Okay, how do we turn the power on? You do this. Bye!
Yeah.
Like, it was that simple.
Right.
Yeah, maybe that is an unlockable. I would say that's a higher unlockable of like adjusting the time dilation. Yeah. I think that here's my personal insight on them meeting themselves, right? Which is back at the end of the last arc, at the Waterdeep Mystery arc, we had the scene at the Palace of Mirrors where we set up these various like prophecies, right? Mm-hmm. And over the course of this adventure, we have one by one been fulfilling those prophecies. I think that's too similar in terms of your future has been shown to you, to the future you shows up and goes, oh, we almost got killed by the da-da-da, don't do this, right? I think thematically and as a mechanism, those two things are too closely aligned.
Yeah.
That I don't want to introduce that at this point. I could see it as part of like a denouement kind of thing or whatever at the end. I could see it maybe being deployed in the last session. Mm-hmm. The only prophecy that's left is the one that Ava had where the reactor was on overload, basically, right? And Grayson was trying to stop it and he couldn't.
Right.
So.
Looks like Black Dragon is giving you a reroll tomorrow. Christian, I don't know if I saw who you were giving a reroll to, but
I mean, of course it's me.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
All right.
Anyway, yes.
So I feel like we have a compelling centerpiece encounter. We actually have two, right? I think our main encounters tomorrow is the journey within the reactor. Mm-hmm. And then secondly, I think the bioengineering manipulation, right? And that one is far more open-ended. That really is about the party taking the machines that are available to them and assuming that they all work at 100% capacity or the way that they anticipate, seeing what they do with those things, right? And I think that's good. That's the part of it where it's not railroady, right? Like, what do you want to do now that you have access to basically re-sleeve any person into any body?
Right.
That's where it turns into not railroady, where you're really giving the players like a lot of choice. And I think that's okay. Like, that's where I think it pays off. The other part of this to keep in mind, right, is it feels, just to kind of put a bow on this whole railroad discussion, because it's something I consider and it comes up a lot online. It may not play out this way. You know, there's a number of times where I get plot radar out and I go, well, we're probably going to tackle these three things. And then we only tackle two. You know, the Froggy thing is a prime example of that. I thought for sure we would get through a lot more of the bioengineering chamber and learn a lot more about it. No, we're not anywhere near close. But what this method does is it allows you to see the pieces that are in play and to map them into a preliminary breakdown of scenes of how these things are going to come together. How you can drop info into particular buckets and distribute it. But the mere act of planning this stuff is really just loading it up here into, these are things that I have to keep in mind. And what this means is when things go off the rails and don't fall into this neat, orderly pattern, I still have this list of things in my brain, and I can start doing dynamic reshuffling of, okay, well, you know what, here's where we're gonna take a shortcut. Here I can jump from this to this. They know about this. They're gonna mention this before you go, one last thing. So the mere act of preparing in this way doesn't mean that this is the plan. I hope it is, because that's what you're best prepared for, right? But if it's not the plan, you've done the information juggling in your head so that on the fly you can start moving those elements around and putting the puzzle pieces in place so that you do still build to that climactic final moment or setup or whatever it is. So it allows you to have a nimble and deft hand when responding to what the players are doing in the event that they go off your script, they go off your plan. I'm prepared for my best case scenario here. But I've got the elements that I need in my brain to go, okay, you know what, if they completely drop the boiled children plot thread or that quest line, who cares? They've broken a promise. It's a moral defeat for Grayson and no one else. So who cares? So I think part of Plot Radar and the Plot Vice here to keep in mind is this is my roadmap. It's not a set of dictation that this is the only way that they can go through the adventure. This is my personal insight into how that builds in the most logical and plausible way that still provides drama and interesting challenges. That doesn't mean that it's going to be that way, but I can respond in an agile fashion if need be, because I've thought about what are the beats and issues that I need to hit. And it's not so much necessarily having an answer to every possible scenario that comes up.
Right.
But it's doing the prep work so that you know that you'll be able to come up with a plausible and interesting answer when they throw you a curveball, on the day. I mean, some questions are things that I'm not really, so BSB Care brought up, have you thought about how this ties back into the Lords of the Iron Keep?
Oh, that was Estelle.
Estelle Castillo. And I think that's one of those questions that's a great question, which does not need to be answered for the audience at this point. You know what I mean? It doesn't necessarily change the outcome of how they solve their immediate problems. And it's better left as a surprise for both the players and the audience than it is for me to answer it now. There's certainly some things that I am thinking about that I don't share. I share 80% with you guys, 75%, right? Because I still want it to be an interesting show for you to watch. So there's that.
Just admit it, Eric was the Iron Keep all along. The Iron Keep was inside of all of us.
I will say, what if they used the reactor to dramatically reverse time or alter time or whatever? I think the interesting thing about the ship being stuck in a dimensional instability, like in this weird chronologic kind of chronosynclastic infundibulum, if you will, right? Is that time can go forward really fast. Time could potentially also go backward really, really fast.
Yeah.
It would be very plausible to say reverse the polarity on the dilithium crystals and all of a sudden they're back before the ship crashed. So, yes, what if they use the reactor to make themselves the new gods? All right. Hey, everyone, that is our time today. Good talk. I think we really did some great brainstorming on on particular elements for tomorrow night's session, and I found our discussion tremendously helpful. I hope you did too. You'll have to tune in tomorrow night at 8 o'clock Pacific to see how it all comes together.
Yes.
Tonight at 8 o'clock Pacific, we have...
The Last VHS Store.
What is The Last VHS Store?
The Last VHS Store is a game with GM Omar Najam, with Holland Farkas, Colin J. Morris, Nika Harper, and Jordan Caves Callerman as a player this time, as a group of kids who are checking out one of the very last video stores to close. It's the late 90s. And there are some weird things happening inside that video store. So it's fun. It's a system that Omar kind of put together. So sort of an opposed D20 system.
This is wrong.
Oh, your date?
I put the time on instead of the date.
Oh, yeah, 324, yes. So yeah, it should be a lot of fun. It's going to be a 3-episode miniseries, just like Mysterium and League of Adventure and other shows have been. So I hope
Is
you
it
tune
all
in.
just going to be from the Last Blockbuster Twitter account? Is that going to be the whole thing?
Yeah.
I love that account. It is a work of terrible cruelty and extreme genius.
Yeah.
And I love everything about it.
Yeah. Yeah, we need to get them to retweet the show. But yeah, so that's that. That's tonight. So that's 8 o'clock Pacific time tonight. It's going to be a lot of fun. I think you guys are going to enjoy it. Lots of nostalgia beats to hit on video stores and such. So
Yeah, absolutely. I played a game of Tales from the Loop over Christmas, and it was... Going back to that era is amazing.
Yeah. Although when we play Tales from the Loop, I think we go back a little bit further than 1998.
Oh yeah. No, we go back to 84.
Yeah.
Rent.
Beta or VHS? You know, I never had a beta. I remember when we first got our VCR in 1981.
You got one early.
Yeah, it was.
Must have huge.
It was probably about that big.
Weighed about 70 pounds.
Yeah, and it would come up like that, and you put the thing in, and then you tamped it down. I remember my brother used to watch Raiders of the Lost Ark like over and over and over again, and that got me into watching Raiders of the Lost Ark. But I never got a beta. Never got into beta.
Yeah, no, we were late tech adapters, adopters at my house. So, no. All right, I'm not going to go on an 80s nostalgia.
Yeah, we could. That's a different show. Okay,
totally different
now
show.
tune in tonight for that.
That is an awesome concept for a mini campaign. That is very cool.
Lots of beasties and stuff and movie things. So movie.
Beasties? Do you mean Goonies?
No, I mean like things coming out of movies.
Oh. All right, a little Cronenberg-esque, huh?
Maybe.
All right, Videodrome it is. Very good. So tune in tonight for that. Tune in tomorrow night for the Iron Keep Chronicles. We'll be back on Thursday at 2 o'clock to talk about how all of this went. Did Tom have a brilliant idea, or did he munge it up again? There's only one way to find out. That's by, probably watching.
Don't forget, that level 4 GM card is hanging in the balance
just hanging.
here.
It's just out. This, yeah. So thank you to Flockwad and BSB Care and DJ Regular and all of our mods for helping keep the channel safe, friendly, clean, and accessible today. Appreciate that. Thanks to everyone who contributed to our discussion today. Thanks for the resubs, Christian Linky and I believe it was Modern Chow?
No, Black Dragon AK.
Black Dragon AK. Thanks for subbing back up again. Thanks for the bits, BeatCon. Thanks to everyone who just shares the message on social media. We really do appreciate you spreading the word about our show. We only got 2 left in this season, so it's time to jump on board the train. No, the train left a long time ago. You can point people at YouTube or whatever, and they'll come back and watch it. We'll have some weirdness in store for you tomorrow night. Until then, let's dungeon! Oh, wait. Did you actually just go back in time and space and click it at the right time? Because I clearly saw you click it too late.
No, I clicked it at the right time.
Did you go back in time and space and click it again? Because I clearly saw you click it too late.
No, I clicked it at the right time.
Did you go back in time and space and click it?